I'm Kevin Klein of the Winnipeg Sun. Welcome to another edition of Winnipeg Newsmakers. And today I'm very grateful to have a friend and a special guest in Chuck Davidson. Chuck is the president and CEO of the Manitoba Chambers. Thank you, Chuck, very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Kevin.
I wanted to get you on the show today to talk about Donald Trump's 25% tariff threat. Because really
Yeah.
it's a threat.
Yeah.
It's not imminent, but it is a threat. So tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I think heading into the most recent presidential election, there was a sense that the president-elect had been talking about this 10% tariff and what the impact of that would be. And I think a lot of businesses could prepare for something along those lines, still knowing that that was going to be significant because like an organization like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce did some homework on this and looked at, okay, if a 10% tariff came into account, what would that mean for the Canadian economy? And it would equate to about $30 billion, which is not a small number from a Canadian perspective. So preparing for that was point one. I think when he came out earlier this week and said, you know what, I'm going to increase that to 25%. This is going to be done on day one to both Canada and Mexico, unless you guys get in line on things like the border and issues that are important to me. I was in Ottawa when this happened. It was like a bomb drop there in terms of this is a big deal. Because if I talk about that $30 billion at 10%, do the math, and we're talking in the neighborhood of $75 billion annually. And virtually every business that does any kind of exports to the US is going to be impacted significantly as a result of this. So this is something that obviously we would suggest Canada and individual provinces have been making their number one priority since this has happened on Tuesday, and are trying to figure out how do we make sure this doesn't happen and it just becomes rhetoric and a sort of a veiled threat.
Well, I mean, it is part of his persona, right? He likes to put out the drop big bombs, and I mean, he is the negotiator of all negotiators, if you ask. And he's done a lot of negotiations, and I think he's shooting high to try and get some other things taken care of. I mean, we have to. There's a couple things that hit me, and maybe you could help me with this. First of all, I believe wholeheartedly he's right in suggesting that we better do something about our borders because we are having a problem on both sides.
Yeah.
We're seeing that in Canada, and we are letting a lot of people into Canada that we have learned are associated with terrorist groups or are criminals wanted in other countries. We have to get better at controlling our border, especially when we have such a large and powerful neighbor. The second one is, would he really would it really impact as much? Because, I mean, that price then is passed on to the American consumer. And there's some products they have to get from Canada.
Yeah. Like products like oil and gas, products like critical minerals are absolutely essential to their economy. So that's part of when people look at it and go, okay, well, do they really want to do this? Because this is going to mean increased costs on their side as well. And do we want to go down that path where we might be putting this tariff on goods coming into the US? I mean, would Canada not want to do likewise in terms of if you're going to do this to us, we're going to kind of do the same thing back to you. And so that's where it's taken into consideration. When I look at this though, it for me it's a bigger issue. The bigger issue is, and I look at this and you would probably look at it the same way that I would, Kevin. I would look at this from the perspective of if this was a business and your number one customer you do over 75% of your business with on a daily basis, what kind of relationship would you try to have with them on an ongoing basis? It should be the kind of relationship where you're spending that time understanding that it would never get to this point, that one of your customers would never say, Kevin, I want to put this 25% tariff on everything that you're doing for me kind of going forward. The relationship we've had for decades and the importance of that trade relationship between us, I'm going to put that aside. I need to do this for me. That's where, from my perspective, I look at it and go, no business would allow this to happen. Whether it be a Manitoba or a Canada, you would know wholeheartedly, here are some of the challenges, whether it's the former government or the current government, here's what their issues are going to be, and be able to be proactive to be able to deal with those. So if the issue is at the border, they have concerns with that, let's be proactive and understand what their challenges are and be able to work with them on them so we don't get to the position where we're having these veiled threats.
That's an excellent point, Chuck. And all very valid points, I might add. Tell me something though. It's a wake up call from that perspective, and you're right from the business perspective. 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customers, but in our case, almost 80% comes from one
Yeah.
giant customer. So we do have these problems. But is it also a wake up call to the government of Canada and maybe some of the provincial governments to spend some time and spend some more time in ensuring that the Canadian economy is becoming more diverse? Because we seem to be blocking things, and we seem to be
Yeah.
I don't want to pick on the carbon tax, but we're doing so many things in government, adding new policies and legislation that we're not really growing or getting away from the dependency we have on other nations. So
Yeah.
is it a wake up call for this now?
It really is, and it's not even trade with other countries. It's trade within Canada, and and you'll know this as well as someone who was a minister in the provincial government. The various details and regulations and challenges we have within Canada, and moving things across various borders within our own province. How are we expected to do a trade relationship with a country like the United States when we can't even look after it internally? So, we've been calling for years in terms of let's look at interprovincial trade barriers that we currently have, whether it's the movement of goods or people or whatever that's going to be across our own country first. Let's get that right. There's a significant economic loss that's happening within Canada because we're not doing that right. Let's fix some of our local supply chains. Let's do some of those elements so that we're stronger as a nation. Should we be looking at diversifying? Absolutely. We create all these trade arrangements with countries all around the world, but we've become so reliant on the United States so that whenever anything happens, and we saw this in 2008 when we had the economic downturn as well, if something happens to your biggest customer, you're going to be impacted as well. And we're feeling the impacts as well, the uncertainty that exists as a result of that. It would be better to have greater control moving forward of your own interests. And so, we're never going to get rid of that relationship with the US simply because of the proximity, but we should be looking at diversifying, whether that's, internally within Canada or looking at other jurisdictions so we're not as reliant on.
And a great opportunity for Manitoba because we have so many minerals in the ground right now that are highly desirable throughout the globe.
Yeah.
We have so many minerals, and that maybe should become more and more of an important thing that our own Manitoba government starts to look at those minerals and say, this is a great way for us to diversify and also grow our local economy and sustain, and it's a sustainable future as well. Is
This,
that not the
this
fact?
is one of the things that we've heard time and time again is that whether it's Manitoba or Canada, we have what the rest of the world needs. What are we doing to make sure that the rest of the world is getting it? Whether it's, critical minerals, are they coming out of the ground? Are we producing it? Are we getting it to that next stage? Whether it's oil and gas, whether it's the green economy, we've got all these pieces in Canada and Manitoba, but our economy isn't moving forward. Our productivity is lower than it is in many other G7 nations. So we don't have this sense in terms of really an economy that's firing on all cylinders, and something we really need to look at to make sure that, when we go into situations like this, we're coming at a position of strength as well. That the US has a lot is looking for a lot of the things that Canada and Manitoba is producing. That's a position of strength that we're in from that perspective as well.
We lead the negotiations at that point. Powers on our
Absolutely.
side. Chuck,
Absolutely.
it is always great talking with you. You are a wealth of information and have a very good perspective in all these issues. So thank you very much for that. And I hopefully we'll get you back on Winnipeg Newsmakers again soon.
Always a pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for the time.